The silence was deafening, broken only by the rhythmic drip, drip, drip of crimson from my trembling hands. 15 years. 15 years I'd poured my heart, soul, and every waking moment into building what they were now so casually dismantling. The faces swam before me, distorted with a mixture of triumph and something that looked sickeningly like pity. They thought they had won. They thought they had taken everything. If you've ever felt betrayed by your own family, subscribe now to join our family of survivors. The genesis of Island Natural Skincare was hardly glamorous. It started in my tiny apartment, a cramped space overflowing with mason jars, essential oils, and the lingering scent of shea butter. I was working 2 jobs, barely scraping by, fueled by instant noodles and an unwavering belief in my vision: affordable, sustainable skincare that didn't compromise on quality. My parents, bless their hearts, couldn't quite grasp it. They'd envisioned a different path for me, a stable career in a respectable field, perhaps accounting like my brother. They meant well, of course, but their well-intentioned skepticism stung. Early birthdays and holidays were often a minefield of thinly veiled disapproval. "When are you going to get a real job, Isla?" my father would ask, his voice laced with concern that felt more like judgment. My mother would chime in, "It's just, we worry about you. This isn't a sustainable life." But I pressed on, fueled by a stubborn refusal to let their doubts become my reality. I reinvested every penny back into the business, working late into the night, perfecting formulas and packaging orders myself. Slowly, painstakingly, Island Natural Skincare began to gain traction. Word of mouth spread like wildfire, fueled by genuine results and a growing community of loyal customers. I moved out of my cramped apartment and into a small warehouse space, hired my first employee, and finally felt like I was starting to breathe. The turning point came 5 years in. I landed a major contract with a national retailer, a deal that would catapult Island Natural Skincare into the mainstream. It was a moment of validation, a sweet victory that I desperately wanted to share with my family, but their response was muted. They offered polite congratulations, but the underlying skepticism remained. My brother Mark even chuckled, "Don't get ahead of yourself, Isla. One deal doesn't make you a success." Mark had always been the golden child, the one who followed the prescribed path, excelling in school and landing a coveted job at a prestigious firm. I, on the other hand, was the black sheep, the dreamer who dared to deviate from the norm. Despite their reservations, I continued to involve my family in the business. I hired my mother as my bookkeeper, believing it would ease her financial anxieties and give her a sense of purpose. I brought Mark on as a consultant, hoping his business acumen would help me navigate the complexities of scaling the company. It was a mistake, born of naivete and a desperate desire for their approval. I wanted them to be proud of me, to finally see that my passion project was more than just a pipe dream. I trusted them implicitly, sharing my financial data, my strategic plans, and my deepest fears. I confided in them about the struggles I faced, the setbacks I encountered, and the sacrifices I made to keep Island Natural Skincare afloat. Then came the day I secured a $1.2 million investment, a game changer that would allow me to expand my product line, increase my marketing efforts, and take Island Natural Skincare to the next level. I remember the phone call vividly, the adrenaline coursing through my veins as I signed the final papers. I immediately called my parents, eager to share the good news, but their response was strange. They were hesitant, almost dismissive. "That's good, Isla," my father said, his voice lacking its usual warmth. "But be careful, money changes people." I brushed it off, attributing their reaction to their inherent cautiousness. I was too excited to let their doubts dampen my spirits. I was on the verge of achieving my dreams and nothing could stop me, or so I thought. The person I trusted most was one of them. The investment should have been a turning point, the moment Island Natural Skincare truly took flight. Instead, it marked the beginning of a slow, agonizing descent. Almost immediately after the funds were transferred, strange things started happening. Production delays mounted, seemingly out of nowhere. Key ingredients were suddenly unavailable, suppliers became unresponsive, and the carefully orchestrated supply chain I had built over years began to crumble. I remember spending countless nights on the phone, desperately trying to salvage deals, placate angry retailers, and reassure my increasingly anxious employees. The pressure was immense. a crushing weight that settled in my chest and made it hard to breathe. I initially chalked it up to growing pains, the inevitable challenges of scaling a business. I pushed myself harder, working even longer hours, fueled by caffeine and a desperate refusal to fail. But the problems persisted, escalating in both frequency and severity. Financial discrepancies began to surface, small at first, but growing larger with each passing week. Dubious expenses, unauthorized transactions, and accounting errors that seemed too convenient to be coincidental. When I brought it to my mother's attention, she dismissed my concerns, attributing the issues to simple oversight. "You're just stressed, Isla," she'd say, her voice laced with a familiar note of condescension. "You're seeing problems where there aren't any." I wanted to believe her, to trust that my own mother wouldn't betray me, but the nagging feeling in the pit of my stomach wouldn't go away. Then came the marketing fiasco. A major campaign I had painstakingly planned, designed to launch our new product line, was inexplicably sabotaged. Key influencers backed out at the last minute, citing vague, creative differences. Ad placements were mysteriously canceled, and our social media accounts were bombarded with negative comments and fake reviews. The campaign, which was supposed to generate buzz and drive sales, became a public relations disaster. I watched in horror as our online reputation plummeted, our sales figures tanked, and the momentum we had worked so hard to build evaporated before my eyes. I frantically tried to contain the damage, issuing apologies, offering refunds, and launching a counter-campaign to address the negative feedback. But it was too late. The damage was done. The doubt began to creep in, whispering insidious questions in the dark corners of my mind. Was I really cut out for this? Had I overestimated my abilities? Was Isla Natural Skincare doomed to fail? Sleepless nights became the norm, filled with endless calculations, frantic phone calls, and the gnawing fear that I was losing everything. I remember staring at the ceiling at 3 a.m., my mind racing, my body exhausted, and my heart aching with a sense of profound loneliness. The weight of the world felt like it was crushing me, and I didn't know where to turn. My relationship with my family, once strained but still intact, began to fray. The constant stress and pressure made me short-tempered and irritable. I lashed out at my parents, accusing them of undermining me, of not believing in me, of secretly wanting me to fail. They denied the accusations, of course, but their defensiveness only fueled my suspicions. Mark, in particular, seemed to relish in my struggles. He would offer unsolicited advice, laced with thinly veiled criticism, and would constantly remind me of my past mistakes. "Maybe this is a sign, Isla," he'd say, a smug look on his face. "Maybe you should just cut your losses and get a real job." His words stung, but I refused to give him the satisfaction of seeing me break. I doubled down on my efforts, determined to prove him wrong, to salvage what was left of my dream. I started digging deeper into the financial records, poring over spreadsheets, invoices, and bank statements, searching for any clue that might explain the discrepancies. What I found sent a chill down my spine. Hidden transactions, offshore accounts, and a series of shell corporations that all led back to one person, my brother, Mark. He had been systematically embezzling funds from Island Natural Skincare, siphoning off money to line his own pockets. The marketing sabotage, the supplier issues, the production delays, it was all orchestrated by him, a calculated effort to undermine my business and seize control. The realization hit me like a physical blow, leaving me gasping for air. The person I had trusted most, the person I had brought into my company with the best of intentions, had been secretly plotting my downfall. I confronted him, of course, armed with the evidence I had painstakingly gathered. He denied it at first, feigning innocence and outrage. But when I presented him with the undeniable proof, his facade crumbled. He confessed everything, his voice dripping with resentment and a disturbing sense of entitlement. He claimed I didn't deserve the success I had achieved, that I was just a naive little girl playing business, and that he was simply taking what was rightfully his. The betrayal cut deep, a wound that went far beyond the financial damage he had inflicted. It shattered my trust in my family, in the people I had always believed would be there for me. The world seemed to tilt on its axis, and I felt like I was falling into an abyss of despair. I was completely alone. The floorboards felt cold beneath my bare feet as I stumbled through my now empty office, the once gleaming space a reflection of my shattered dreams. The weight of Mark's betrayal, coupled with the financial ruin he had engineered, threatened to suffocate me. Creditors were calling, lawsuits were piling up, and my employees, the loyal team who had believed in my vision, were facing unemployment. It was all crashing down around me, a tidal wave of destruction that threatened to pull me under. I remember staring at my reflection in the darkened window, barely recognizing the hollow-eyed woman staring back. The vibrant, ambitious entrepreneur I once was had been replaced by a ghost, a shell of a person haunted by regret and despair. I had poured everything into Island Natural Skincare, sacrificed my time, my energy, and my relationships, all for a dream that had been so callously ripped away. And the worst part was, it was my own family who had wielded the knife. The crimson seemed to stain everything I touched. I spent the next few days in a daze, numb to the world around me. I couldn't eat, I couldn't sleep, I could barely even function. The weight of the betrayal was a physical burden, a constant ache in my chest that made it hard to breathe. I replayed the events in my head over and over again, searching for some sign, some warning that I had missed. But there was nothing. Mark had been so convincing, so supportive, so seemingly invested in my success. He had played the role of the concerned brother to perfection, all while secretly plotting my demise. My parents, too, had played their part. Their constant skepticism, their subtle undermining, their willingness to turn a blind eye to Mark's actions, it all pointed to a level of complicity that I couldn't comprehend. How could they do this to me? How could they betray their own daughter for the sake of money and control? The questions swirled in my mind, unanswered and unanswerable, fueling my anger and despair. I started to isolate myself, shutting out my friends, my colleagues, and anyone who tried to offer support. I didn't want their pity, their condolences, or their empty platitudes. I just wanted to be left alone with my pain. One night, as I sat alone in the darkness of my apartment, a bottle of sleeping pills clutched in my trembling hand, I found myself staring at a picture of my grandmother. She had been a strong, resilient woman who had overcome countless hardships in her life. She had taught me the importance of perseverance, of never giving up, even when the odds were stacked against me. As I gazed at her smiling face, I felt a flicker of something stir within me, a spark of defiance that refused to be extinguished. Was I really going to let them win? Was I going to let Mark's betrayal and my parents' complicity define my life? Was I going to allow myself to be consumed by despair and give up on everything I had worked so hard to achieve? The answer came to me with a clarity that cut through the fog of my depression. No, I wouldn't let them win. I wouldn't let them break me, I would fight back. The decision was a turning point, a moment of profound transformation. It was as if a switch had been flipped inside me, replacing despair with determination, sadness with steel. The sleeping pills went back into the medicine cabinet, and the picture of my grandmother went back on the nightstand, a reminder of the strength and resilience that I carried within me. I rose from my chair, a new sense of purpose coursing through my veins. The pain was still there, the betrayal still stung, but now it was fueled by a burning desire for justice, a relentless hunger for revenge. I knew it wouldn't be easy. Mark had carefully covered his tracks, and my parents were likely to protect him at all costs. But I was no longer the naive, trusting young woman they had manipulated and betrayed. I was hardened, sharpened, and fueled by a rage that would not be denied. I would use their own tactics against them, turning their greed and their arrogance into their downfall. The game had changed. I was no longer a victim. I was a planner. The first step was to gather irrefutable proof, evidence that would stand up in court and expose Mark's crimes to the world. I started by meticulously reconstructing the financial records, tracing the hidden transactions, and uncovering the network of shell corporations he had used to launder the stolen funds. It was a painstaking process, requiring hours of research, forensic accounting, and a deep dive into the murky world of offshore finance. I hired a private investigator, a former law enforcement officer with a reputation for discretion and a knack for uncovering hidden truths. He helped me track down witnesses, gather documents, and build a solid case against Mark. I also installed a sophisticated surveillance system in my office, equipped with hidden cameras and audio recorders, hoping to catch him in the act of further wrongdoing. I knew he would be arrogant enough to believe he had gotten away with it, that he was untouchable. I planned to use that arrogance against him. It was a dangerous game, one that could land me in legal trouble if I wasn't careful. But I was willing to take the risk. The thought of seeing Mark pay for his crimes, of watching his carefully constructed world crumble around him, fueled my determination. I also needed to understand the full extent of my parents' involvement. Were they merely complicit, turning a blind eye to Mark's actions? Or were they actively involved in the scheme? The answer, I suspected, would be far more painful than I could imagine. I started by subtly questioning them, probing for inconsistencies in their stories, and watching for any signs of guilt or deception. I also reviewed their financial records, looking for any connections to Mark's illicit activities. What I found was both heartbreaking and infuriating. My parents had not only been aware of Mark's crimes, but they had actively benefited from them. They had received lavish gifts, taken extravagant vacations, and used the stolen funds to pay off their debts. They had sacrificed their own daughter's well-being for the sake of money and comfort. The realization solidified my resolve. I wouldn't let them get away with it. They would face the consequences of their actions, no matter how painful it might be. I began to document their involvement, gathering evidence of their complicity, and preparing to expose their betrayal to the world. While gathering evidence, I knew I had to project an image of defeat. I wanted Mark and my parents to believe they had won, that I was broken and defeated. I started by withdrawing from the business world, canceling meetings, declining invitations, and avoiding any public appearances. I let my office fall into disarray, allowing the weeds to grow and the dust to settle. I even started dressing down, wearing old clothes and neglecting my appearance. I wanted them to see me as a shadow of my former self, a pathetic reminder of their victory. At family gatherings, I was quiet and withdrawn, offering only monosyllabic answers to their questions. I pretended to be struggling financially, lamenting the failure of my business, and hinting at the possibility of bankruptcy. Mark, of course, lapped it up, reveling in my misery and offering condescending words of advice. My parents, too, seemed pleased with my downfall, their eyes gleaming with a mixture of pity and satisfaction. Little did they know, every tear, every sigh, every moment of apparent weakness was part of my carefully orchestrated plan. While they celebrated their triumph, I was secretly plotting their destruction. I smiled, I nodded, I played the fool. But inside, a storm was brewing. I would make them pay. Every last one of them. One close call came when Mark decided to help me sort through my remaining business assets. He suggested selling off some equipment and inventory to recoup some of my losses. I knew this was just a ploy to further siphon off funds and cover his tracks, but I played along. As he rummaged through my office, he stumbled upon a hidden camera, cleverly disguised as a smoke detector. My heart leaped into my throat. Had he discovered my plan, would he expose me before I was ready? I quickly diverted his attention, feigning ignorance and dismissing the device as a faulty alarm system. He seemed to buy it, but I knew I had to be more careful. I relocated the cameras, making them even more discreet and ensuring they were beyond his reach. The incident served as a stark reminder of the risks I was taking, of the razor's edge I was walking. But it also fueled my determination. I knew I was getting closer to the truth, that Mark's arrogance would ultimately be his undoing. The anticipation was excruciating. Each day felt like an eternity, each conversation a minefield. I knew that one wrong move could expose my plan and jeopardize everything I had worked for. I spent countless nights poring over legal documents, consulting with my lawyer, and refining my strategy. I wanted to ensure that every detail was perfect, that there were no loopholes or weaknesses that could be exploited. I knew that Mark and my parents would fight back, that they would use their wealth and their connections to try to discredit me. But I was prepared. I had anticipated their every move, and I had a countermeasure for every attack. The day of reckoning was drawing near, and when it finally arrived, it would be glorious. I could almost taste the sweetness of revenge, the satisfaction of seeing justice served. They thought they had won. They thought they had broken me. But they were wrong. I was stronger than ever, and I was about to unleash a storm that would devastate their lives. The key to their undoing wasn't just the money, it was their insatiable greed, their belief that they were smarter than everyone else. Mark, in particular, had developed a dangerous habit of bragging, especially when he thought he was among allies. I discovered this through a seemingly innocuous recording I'd made during a family dinner, a dinner where I was playing the role of the defeated sister. He'd been drinking, emboldened by his apparent victory, and started boasting about how he'd manipulated the suppliers, how he'd sabotaged the marketing campaigns, how he'd masterminded the entire operation. He even detailed specific transactions, nomming offshore accounts and shell corporations, all with a smug grin on his face. My blood ran cold, but I kept my composure, offering the occasional supportive nod, all while secretly recording his every word. It was the smoking gun I needed, the irrefutable proof that would expose his crimes to the world. And even more damning, my parents, instead of admonishing him, chuckled along, adding their own little digs and insults, further solidifying their complicity in the entire scheme. The recording was crystal clear, their voices unmistakable, their guilt undeniable. It was time to set the trap. The plan was simple: lure them into a false sense of security, create a situation where they felt completely in control, and then drop the hammer. I decided to stage a going out of business sale, a final liquidation of my remaining assets. I advertised heavily, promising deep discounts and exclusive deals. The goal was to attract as many potential buyers as possible, creating a chaotic, high-pressure environment where Mark and my parents would feel compelled to interfere. I knew they wouldn't be able to resist the temptation to try and skim off a little extra profit, to take advantage of the situation one last time. And that's exactly what I was counting on. I made sure to accidentally mention to Mark that I had a large sum of cash stored in my office safe, proceeds from the initial sales. I even hinted that I was planning to deposit it in a local bank, a bank that I knew he had connections with. The bait was set. Now all I had to do was wait. The day of the sale arrived and the atmosphere was electric. The store was packed with customers, eager to snag a bargain. Mark and my parents were there, too, hovering in the background, watching my every move. I could see the greed in their eyes, the barely concealed excitement at the prospect of getting their hands on that cash. I played my part to perfection, acting harried and overwhelmed, struggling to keep up with the demands of the customers. I made a show of counting the money, stuffing it into a large duffel bag, and then ostentatiously locking it in the safe. Mark watched me like a hawk, his eyes never leaving the safe. I knew he was planning something. As the day wore on, the crowd began to thin out and the pressure mounted. I could feel Mark closing in, his presence growing more and more insistent. Finally, as I was locking up the store for the night, he approached me, a sly grin on his face. "Isla," he said, "I've been thinking. Not safe for you to be carrying that much cash around. Why don't you let me take it to the bank for you? I have a friend who works there, he can make sure it's deposited safely." My parents stood behind him, nodding in agreement, their faces radiating a mixture of anticipation and triumph. This was it, the moment of truth. I hesitated for a moment, pretending to consider his offer. "I don't know, Mark," I said. "I'm not sure I trust you." He chuckled, a condescending, patronizing sound. "Come on, Isla," he said. "I'm your brother, you can trust me." My parents chimed in, urging me to accept his help, assuring me that he had my best interests at heart. I looked from Mark to my parents, their faces etched with deception and greed. The crimson felt like a shroud, suffocating me. Then I smiled, a slow, deliberate smile that sent a shiver down my spine. "Okay, Mark," I said, "I trust you." I handed him the keys to the safe, watching as his eyes lit up with avarice. He opened the safe, reached for the duffel bag, and then froze. His eyes widened in disbelief, his face contorted with rage. The bag wasn't filled with cash. It was filled with something far more dangerous. As he pulled out the first item, his world began to crumble. He looked up at me, his mouth agape, a silent scream trapped in his throat. My parents rushed forward, their faces etched with confusion and alarm. And then, the trap snapped shut. The police sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder and louder, signaling the end of their reign of greed and deceit. The game was over, but the final move was yet to be revealed. The bag wasn't filled with cash, it was filled with evidence. The first item Mark pulled out was a USB drive labeled Mark's Confessions. His face drained of all color as he realized what it contained: the audio recording from that family dinner, the recording of him detailing his crimes, his voice echoing his betrayal. Then came the meticulously compiled financial records, the forensic accounting reports, the documents tracing the stolen funds to his offshore accounts. Each item was a nail in his coffin, a testament to his greed and my relentless pursuit of justice. My parents stumbled backward, their faces a mixture of horror and disbelief. They understood in that instant that their carefully constructed world was about to crumble around them. The police arrived, sirens blaring, and the officers swarmed the store. Mark was immediately placed in handcuffs, his protests falling on deaf ears. My parents were questioned, their initial denials quickly unraveling under the weight of the evidence. As Mark was led away, he turned to me, his eyes filled with a venomous rage. "You haven't won, Isla," he spat. "This isn't over." I simply smiled, a cold, detached smile that reflected the emptiness I felt inside. It was over. He just didn't know it yet. The fallout was swift and brutal. The recording went viral, splashed across every news outlet, exposing Mark's crimes to the world. His reputation was shattered, his career ruined. He was charged with fraud, embezzlement, and money laundering, facing a long prison sentence. My parents, too, were implicated in the scandal, their complicity laid bare for all to see. They were ostracized by their friends and colleagues, their social standing destroyed. Their lavish lifestyle came to an abrupt end as their assets were seized and their ill-gotten gains were confiscated. The shame and humiliation were unbearable, driving a wedge between them that would never heal. The legal battles dragged on for months, a messy and acrimonious affair. Mark tried to negotiate a plea bargain, offering to implicate others in exchange for a lighter sentence, but the prosecution refused to budge. The evidence against him was overwhelming, and they were determined to make an example of him. My parents, desperate to salvage what was left of their reputation, turned on each other, each blaming the other for their predicament. Their marriage, already strained by years of deceit and manipulation, finally imploded. In the end, Mark was found guilty on all charges and sentenced to a lengthy prison term. My parents were also convicted of fraud and conspiracy, receiving substantial fines and community service. They lost everything, their money, their reputation, their freedom, and their family. As I watched them being led away, I felt a pang of sadness, a fleeting moment of compassion for the people they once were. But it was quickly overshadowed by a sense of justice served. They had made their choices, and they had to face the consequences. The business, once teetering on the brink, was now thriving. The exposure of Mark's crimes had cleared the way for new investors, and my reputation as a shrewd and determined leader was solidified. I rebuilt the company, brick by brick, creating a culture of honesty and integrity. I surrounded myself with loyal and trustworthy people, ensuring that nothing like this would ever happen again. The scars of betrayal remained, a constant reminder of the pain I had endured. But they also served as a source of strength, a testament to my resilience and my unwavering commitment to justice. They lost everything. I just smiled. Revenge isn't sweet, it's necessary. It's about reclaiming what was stolen, about restoring balance, about sending a message that betrayal will not be tolerated. It's about standing up for yourself, even when the odds are stacked against you. It's about refusing to be a victim. Would you have done the same? Let me know in the comments. Subscribe for more justice.